Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see you again. I'm here with Jim Langley for our office hours. Hi, Jim. How are you doing?
Well, Louis, I hope you are, and I'm so glad people are joining us. I saw some of the people who signed up, and I'm really looking forward to the chat.
This is great. I see you're armed with your office hour coffee mug.
Yes.
Um, and that's kind of the spirit of today. Jim, you have a sentence. It's not about the sage from the stage, right?
Yes, but the coach from the side. That's right. So we're all learning. By the way, I know you want to ask me some questions, but I was presenting recently in Southern California, and a fellow who came up from health sciences, and he said the very things that I'm proposing about turning ownership of the process over to the donors is the same thing the medical profession is learning about the patients. That the minute you start telling people what to do, the minute you start look like you're exerting control over people or getting them to do what you want, they rebel. But if you say to people, what do you think needs addressing? They'll be very honest. I'm overweight. I drink too much. What should you do? I need to go on a diet. I need to come back. What goals will you set? Then people will take ownership of their health care plan, and then the doctor affirms, coaches, provides encouragement and respects the process. Seems like we're learning this across the board, is not to take ourselves so seriously. Let people state what's important to them and facilitate. So there we go. Another example.
Thank you, Jim. Hang on to that idea. I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that in a second. For everybody who's just joining, the rule today is that there are no rules. This is a session that you
Yes.
make happen. Ask your questions, interrogate Jim.
Absolutely.
Just ask your deep-seated questions that you have about our profession and where things are going. But Jim, to follow up on your comment about the medical profession, how do they react to that approach? Because I imagine if they are also efficiency focused, as many fundraisers and many fundraising organizations seem to be, there must be some type of a disconnect there where they're saying, oh my goodness, billable hours, this is going to be horrible.
Oh, exactly. So, what we've learned, Louis, it really doesn't matter in some cases, in some minds, even when you identify an issue and it needs to be fixed and the way to fix it, you get great resistance from certain people representing the establishment, the status quo, who are threatened by it, who see a loss of ego, who see a loss of revenue. But you see, as long as people care about outcomes, in this case, health outcomes, there's going to be tremendous pressure to respond to that. So if one way starts to show improved health outcomes, guess what the insurers start to do is to say, oops, what we want to do is drive down costs. So we have to then adhere to the processes that produce the best outcomes. So it'll be that financial pressure. In the same way within our field, eventually the realization of the wastefulness of many traditional approaches that will ultimately create the correction. But it'll be slow. We know that about human nature.
That's such a fantastic metaphor or comparison, because I see there's a third party there that's adding some type of rationality into it. In our nonprofits, it would be boards, no? Or who would the equivalent of that, wake up call organization be?
Boards, potentially CFOs, anybody who's minding costs, and particularly minding cost vis-a-vis outcomes. So you take the traditional campaign and you take a lot of the money that's wasted on some of the traditional events, the traditional collateral material. It's a matter of time before some enterprising set of CFOs start to go, wait a minute, that place raised, $500 million at 4 cents on the dollar, and we're at 20 cents on the dollar. It's a matter of time before they start talking among themselves. CFOs, like all of us, have their own organizations. Again, it will never happen as quickly as any of us would like, but it will, simply because demographics are putting so much economic pressure on institutions of higher learning that everybody's looking for ways to squeeze more efficiency and outcome out of the dollars they have.
Wonderful. So what I'm hearing is this is kind of a counterintuitive way to be more business savvy by seemingly not being so business savvy.
Right, seemingly.
Yeah, exactly.
Seemingly, which is the irony of it, is that, people hear things we say, well, that's soft. That sounds idealistic. Actually, it's the best way, it's the most certain way over time. So isn't it interesting how people want to dismiss what might be more idealistic, spiritual, authentic as not efficient? But it's just like honesty itself. It is the best policy. Just like integrity is the best business plan, right? It's the most sustainable business plan. Honesty, integrity. I don't know
Absolutely.
why we separated those two and determined one was, right, some hard, nasty way was more efficient than honest and authentic way. I don't know how we got that way.
Yeah, it's it's being able to have that long-term view, right? I mean, I'm developing this theory that anything that has a 3 years or 3+ years outcome might as well just not exist.
Yeah,
And
might as well be an eon, right? But look at that in terms of all human behavior. I know we get frustrated, but look at that. Take anything you care about and look at this difficulty in adjusting to it until it's like right in your face. That's part of human nature. Or to hope for a magical solution. Something will happen that will make this go away. And we only, as a species, deal with things when they're close or hurting or, starting to eliminate some of us. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's optimistic.
Well, I'm a student of history, and I'm an objective observer of human nature. We don't anticipate real well, most of us, and the ones of us who do have this kind of Cassandra complex. If you know your mythology, she's given the gift of prophecy, but then condemned to never be believed. How many of us who start to see the future from data analysis feel like Cassandra? A lot.
Wonderful. So welcome, Michelle and Debbie. It's great to see you and all those others that are here today. Please, everybody, feel free to introduce yourself. Say hi to Jim. Ask your questions.
Yeah.
Hi, Devin. Welcome. This is
We're
wonderful.
looking at the chat room. Everybody's welcome. What's on your mind? What are you worried about?
Exactly. I have a conversation starter for us, Jim, as if we needed one. But okay, so I had noticed your bookshelf. And then I was sharing earlier that my wife assisted me with mine recently. So what I thought we could play was pick a book, at random or not so at random from behind that has shaped your thinking, maybe about fundraising, about the world. And yeah, just maybe we can talk about that.
You want me to literally do that or just cite a book?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, yeah. Or just say it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
a lot of my early influences were in literature, so I hope we have some literature majors out here. My parents, as many of you know, were Shakespearean actors, so I grew up hearing Shakespeare being rehearsed in the living room, and it was Shakespeare's insight into human psychology. If you know Shakespeare, his soliloquies are psychological; they're internal, right? And then I developed a great interest in Charles Dickens, and there's a ton of Charles Dickens back there that I've read a lot about. And Charles Dickens was also deeply psychological as to the why of humanity. So at this time of year, I'd encourage everybody to do something, read a book they think they know all too well and don't just watch the adaptations of it on screen or in theater. Read the original Christmas Carol. Read, and when you read it, keep in mind a few things. There was no story about Christmas written before A Christmas Carol. There was no archetypal stories about Christmas. Every Christmas story that follows is patterned on Charles Dickens. Dickens, in A Christmas Carol, attempts to understand the darkness in the human spirit and to redeem it. So he takes a character that seems irredeemable, Ebenezer Scrooge, and through reflection on how he got to be the way he is, a deprived childhood, of letting his soul and heart get pinched off, of making money the way he wanted to then become secure. He looks back on his life with the help of some ghosts and does an inventory of his life and how he got to be that way, and realizes he cut himself off from things that were wonderful and beautiful in an attempt to achieve financial security. And then by letting go of those things, is reborn and says at the end that he becomes the kindest, nicest old man that the city has ever known. And then for those of you who love, kind of intellectual history, keep in mind 50 years later, fellows named Freud and Brewer come along and publish the first paper on psychoanalysis and catharsis, citing Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? He is the one they study to understand how we can all become reborn by becoming what? More charitable. It's a beautiful story.
Ta-da, goosebumps as always. I have a question from Michelle. Jim, do you have standout examples of nonprofits that do good donor surveys that specifically gauge donor affinity, and 2, specific values that attract donors to your cause? I know you're going to have a field trip with this question.
Well, this is what Lewis and I and Ron Cohen have been working on recently. So we're all learning. And I can't say that I'm surveying the landscape, but we're doing some work for University of Nevada at Reno. We're doing some work for San Diego State University. We're doing some work for, we're trying to incorporate this into all the assessments that we do, not just the data analysis, which we call a vital signs analysis, not just traditional feasibility study, but a broader sampling so that we can get, one, we can listen to a broader sampling of constituents, and 2, start to see how the institution is aligned with that broader set of constituent opinion, right? So we're looking for gaps between what institutions perceive of themselves, what they want from their donors and their constituents, and the gap between that and what those constituents want and expect from their donors. But one of the things we're trying to do in these surveys is to send a more fundamental signal out to the question, I think, and that is, you matter. We care about you. And what we're trying to do is to demonstrate this now by listening, and not just listening to you as donors, but listening to you as people to see if we can better communicate, better align, and find more commonalities. So, I'm looking at this everywhere I go. We know listening is becoming the motif of the day, that all sophisticated fundraising shops are moving into more listening modes. We call it forensic listening, to listen in a constructive way, to discover, to quantify, and then to be able to develop strategies on that. So we hope some of you share what your listening looks like. Polling is one way of listening, of structured listening. So those, I know who I'm familiar with, and every client I'm working with, we're engaged in some kind of active listening, and we're wherever possible are starting with the board to get them to understand the power of listening, to get them to be listening stewards of donors, particularly loyal donors, high-end donors. And we're trying to work this listening motif up and down the organization, and even recruit non-advancement professionals within the organization and volunteers to join us in this listening exercise. And the more people we get listening, the more we hear, and the better we respond, the more people outside who are complemented, and the more we forge commonalities of purpose. You couldn't strike a more vibrant nerve with me or cause me to talk more endlessly than by getting on this topic. Let's get out of talking. Let's get into listening. Wonderful things are going to happen. We're going to rebuild community. We're going to rediscover each other. We're going to create kindred spiritship. It's just the better path forward. To me, it's the paradigm shift.
Absolutely, Michelle. So feel free to reach out to Jim or I, and to to continue this conversation. Forensic listening.
Sorry, Louis, but forensic. Then let's start finding questions and sharing questions that really are useful. What is it? Where I saw something the other day. I found a little dismaying. 5 top questions, and it was a little bit like, "What's your favorite color? What's on your mind?" Okay, I'm not against small talk or casual conversation. we're trying to get to the spirit of the philanthropist. We're trying to get at what makes people give, not to use it against them, but to use it for them, right? And find ways of working with them.
And Jim, do you find, and I'm going to use maybe a bad word, but that people's BS detectors are on high alert nowadays?
And I'm thrilled with that. And I got to give younger generations credit for that, because they've had so much thrown at them, right? They've gotten a way to sort through it. So think about this. Probably all of us have had disappointing relationships in our personal lives. This is how many donors feel about their relationships with organizations. And what happens when we get disappointed in personal relationships? We get more cautious, more wary. We start to put new relationships to a different test than we did old ones. That's where they are. And so if you sound false, if you sound like the last group of people that disappointed them, it's like, well, I've heard that before. And they're looking for that vulnerability, that non-guarded, that openness, that, right? That something in you or in us that sounds, I haven't heard that before. That person sounds real. That organization sounds real. And one way of doing this is to invite criticism. Is what could we have done better? Where did we let you down? Where did we miss the boat? Where did we get stuck in the mud? When did we fail to listen, right? This shows non-defensiveness and a true willingness to learn, right? So somebody said something in the chat box, and it's real hard to keep up, but believe me, we'll do our best here with all the comments coming in. I want to make sure is, where does this all start? Where does it all start? Within. But soul searching. Have I done a good enough job? Am I doing the best I can by my clients, by my friends, by my colleague? You see, all change that we bring to organizations starts with self-assessment and honesty born within, that allows us to spread that and to show that we grow by being more honest with ourselves, and we help organizations grow in the same way.
Okay, Jim, this leads me to another question. I'm going to post it here for everybody to see, but it's about stewardship. And I think what you're talking about is surveying also as a form of stewardship, right?
Yes. And it's not, see, we define stewardship as thanking. But donors say they want to know about impact. What do I want? What do I want us to do? And I want us to know about the state of the relationship. And one of the things I want us to know is, where do we fit in their overall hierarchy? How do we compare to the best philanthropic organization in their mind? And what could we learn from the ones that they think are better than us? When you start asking those questions, you make a powerful impression on people. It's like, they really are about continuous improvement. Who out there has provided your most joyous, most rewarding, most satisfying stewardship experience, and what can we learn from them? Absolutely. Put it on the table, invite it.
And people are also asking for community, right? They want to have an ongoing conversation, not just a thank you letter.
Thank you, Louis. They want to belong to something. So what's the ongoing conversation? What's the ongoing interconnection that makes them feel as if they belong? So if it's all staged, it's all posed, it's all prepared, to impress, they go, well, that's nice and maybe somewhat reinforcing. But where's the dialogue? Where's the ongoing conversation? How do I feel a part of something on a more regular basis?
Absolutely. And I think Debbie here is sharing a really good point, and these are kind of the basics of stewardship, but I feel and I hear you, Jim, advocate for kind of a broader role and more strategic role of donor stewardship.
Well, I'd put stewardship at the top of advancement, actually.
Oh, there you go.
Right. And it should, so we should be hiring a strategist in that role who is charged with assessing and improving the state of constituent relations. And have the ear of the vice president, if not be the vice president, and certainly have the ear of the CEO and the board. It is the number one objective of a nonprofit organization today, is to, improve stewardship. Far more, right? It's the path to better fundraising. So if you put fundraising ahead of stewardship, guess what? It's the number one advancement objective of a high functioning nonprofit organization. It's the most strategic thing you could do, because if you listen to your donors, you will gather a wealth of information that will allow you to remain relevant and responsive.
Absolutely. And I was interested to read recently, I think it was the CEO of Reddit, or a couple of these tech CEOs that had given themselves the title of Chief Community Officer.
Yeah.
And I found that kind of very parallel and interesting.
Well, here's another way to think about, just we're with a group of creative colleagues. So, pay attention to your retail outlets. So when I travel, I always wonder if hotel executives actually stay in their hotels, right? Because they produce these little bottles of things and you can't read the label on them when you're wet and you're old like me. And then you try to put the bar of soap in the soap tray and it falls out. You go, does anybody stay in this hotel, or the coffee machine doesn't work, or what? Is anybody stay in this hotel? So if you want to get good at being a hotelier, go and stay in your hotel. If you want to be good at fundraising, go listen to people in annual giving at the point of retail. And provide mechanisms for reports to come up every day. How many people hung up the phone? How many people said, no, because I don't have enough money? Right? Whoever is doing the most interaction, and I'll call that the point of retail, with the most donors, should be paid the most attention to, because it's the most valuable collection point.
Absolutely. And you just touched on something really interesting, that is not just having the idea, it's implementing a process to really make it a reality, making that work with your systems, et cetera.
Yeah, collection. So again, collection of data. So what's stewardship? I use the phrase field intelligence, because there's a field out there you're supposed to be paying attention to. You need to be constantly gathering intelligence from it, so you know what's going on and you can adjust and adapt quickly. And Lewis, today, we have to react more quickly, because what you talked about, the BS detector, is we screw up for just a little while and people start to move on and start to go, they don't get it, and I'm not hanging around forever.
Well, first they hear about it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Jim. They hear about it much sooner, and they
Yes.
comment on it. They go on social media, and then you don't have control, right? It used to be
That's right.
You could wait until the annual report was published to cover it up.
Can't. It's such a good point. They go on social media, which is an indication of they tell their friends. And so word of mouth is working against you, whether it's on social media or elsewhere, and you're not picking up on it. It's snowballing. By the time you pick up on it, you got a deficit that's going to take a while to break down and chip away at. The sooner you pick up on it. And again, remember, pay attention to the few that complain, because most people just stew and go away. The people who are complaining visibly are your friends, because they're telling you what others won't and are reluctant to.
Thank you, Jim. And Michelle here shared a good thought, and I'm going to share an anecdote about that, but I just want to invite everybody to make your comments, share what's on your mind. As Jim said earlier, we want to hear from you and get a pulse of how everybody's feeling it at the end of the year. So Michelle says, stewardship is the slice of work that many fundraisers enjoy the most, but make the least time for. And Jay Goulart in the comments has made similar comments as to why is it even something different. So I set up a system to thank our donors that come on online, and it's totally personalized, but I get a draft written in my inbox every morning. It's the favorite part of my day. It's the most life affirming. I get to look everybody up, reestablish connections. So it is definitely something that should be a part, right, Jim?
Yeah. And I do think, appreciate Jay raising the question, is it's not separate and apart from fundraising. It's the most strategic objective of a nonprofit institution, which then empowers fundraising. It isn't to separate it, it's to connect it, but to put the horse before the cart. That's what we're talking about, not creating separate silos within an organization, but by adopting as a principal ethic that we are stewards of the resources that we have at our disposal and the relationships that are entrusted to us, then everything else flows from it. To put fundraising at the forefront, in fact, diminishes and causes people to feel exploited for a particular purpose and end. Does that make sense, Jay?
Wonderful.
See where I'm going?
Totally. So I'm going to share another conversation starter. I hope everybody joins in. And this is a bit of a loaded question, right? And I think it continues the conversation about stewardship. But the concept of donor love, you need to love your donors to, the grave, blah, blah, blah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I've seen a lot of thought and different perspectives on that, mostly over the last 12 to 18 months. Do you have any thoughts about that? And of course, it depends on how you interpret love, which could be functional or dysfunctional.
Sure. I think it'd be overstated, right? It's overstated that all you have to do is love. And then in some people's minds, that's thank or praise, when donors want accountability. And so if you say, one, we should have to show them, treat them like investors and show them that their money was wisely invested and that we're accountable, and we're going to show a return on that investment, a societal return on investment. That's better than being gushy and gooey. But now if love is then interpreted by loving the donor for who they are, loving the commitment behind their giving, loving their participation, loving their opinion, even when it skewers us, I'm all for it. But let's define what love is, and let's not say humoring somebody or gushing at them is any substitute for delivering on our promises and showing that we are generating an efficient return on philanthropic investment.
Absolutely. So that was, I confess, kind of a loaded question. Susan here shares, we want donors to feel warmth and love for our org, obviously, I think, and to have us be the first they think of when they think of charity. So awareness, presence.
We want that warmth, but again, warmth is not a substitute for responsiveness. Warmth is a function of a relationship, but delivering on promise is a function of sustainable relationships. What if you had a warm friend who didn't show up on time, didn't do what he or she said, and broke promises or was indifferent to your point of view, right? You'd say, I appreciate the warmth, but I'd like a little bit more accountability. So let's get all those elements in there.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So everybody, please feel free to ask away. I'm going to share a book.
Louis, there's a question to you about what do you do each morning? How do you start the day to get wired right to sort of be at your professional best? What's your point of orientation? I'd love to hear that too.
Oh my goodness. So as always, it's kind of technical too. So what I did was we get an email every time somebody makes a gift. And I was very annoyed that I was never getting to thank those people, that we didn't, again, like you said, Jim, you have to do the right thing and then have a process to do the right thing, because we're dealing with things at kind of a volume sometimes. So we had a couple of sessions in the donor participation project about marketing automation. So what I do is I have a little program thingy and something called Zapier, which reads my email, those email receipts that the donor gets. And we know they're ugly. We know that's not a real thank you. That doesn't count as thanking somebody within 24 hours, right? So it reads that, it composes a draft of that email, it puts it in my draft box. And then I look it up every morning, and I look every donor up. And if it says, Dear John, because only John made the gift, I say John and Mary, and then maybe I put something personal in there. And I get through 10, 15, after Giving Tuesday, 70 of those a day. And just the feeling of starting that day with that is wonderful.
There you go. I try to always initiate, in other words, not react, but initiate. I did that throughout my career, initiate contact with donors, personalize, customize, never allow yourself to get in such a reactive mode that you don't do justice to the people who are most important to you. Wonderful comments in the chat box. Jay talking about the donor experience, and maybe we could have more conversation about that. And Susan talking about understanding donors want to be thanked in different ways. Somebody told me about a book or a construct years ago, and I looked it up. about relationships themselves and how people like to be loved in different ways, or how love is expressed in different ways. Some people like to be thanked. Some people like kind of recognition, et cetera, et cetera. But absolutely the customization of these things, including the donor experience. So when we talk about stewardship in the future, it will be the customization of donor experience. How do we develop the most rewarding experiences for the largest set of donors we can, obviously with a preference for the most generous and the most loyal. The loyal we continue, I think, to do too little for, because they're so incredibly important to us. The donor experience, right? What does that look like? And how are we imagining that? I think more and more we're going to have to start projecting donor experience in our early engagement, in our solicitations. Make that a part of it. Here's how we want you to continue to be involved. It's going to send a signal: we want you for you, not just your financial support, but we want you to be a part of our community.
Absolutely. Debbie has a good comment too. She says, would love to see us get away from form letters on institution letterhead.
Yeah. Yeah, and more voices, right? So, one of the things we're looking at in institutions of higher learning is you got alumni working for the place who could also be engagement officers, who could also be stewards, right? Mm-hmm. And just recruiting a larger cadre of people to thank and respond, so you get different voices of people, and then you can see which constituents respond to, and then to do this more spontaneously, right? So I'm always advising CEOs and boards to carry names of donors in their breast pocket. When they get a chance, jot them a note. Just think about the difference their gift made in some tangible way, and jot them a note. That piece of equipment you provided is being used 24 hours a day and is allowing us to do diagnostics we couldn't imagine. Or that Carillon that you funded, lends a level of artistry and aesthetic to our campus, every single hour of every single day. Just something like that, more spontaneous, more natural, less forced and formulated. Absolutely.
Yes. And Jim, I often see pushback for these concepts, for these ideas, from people that are the brand police, marketing departments, who feel like everything needs to look and feel and even sound a certain way or be spelled a certain way, that, Oxford comma is either good or bad, etc. What do you, how do you see this? I obviously see it as, I think marketing has actually moved on to more something like what you say, but how do you help these CEOs deal with dissonance?
Yeah, I do have these concerns about that very rigid form of brand marketing, and that very unimaginative form of brand marketing, that boils everything down to a phrase that we'll all repeat, and then if we all repeat it, then somehow people will behave differently. I'm a little troubled by that whole set of ideas. But it's a classic kind of command and control paradigm. If you over control something, you reduce impact and efficiency, right? If you have no control, you create chaos. So how do you strike that balance, right? You don't want people writing letters to donors complaining about how they're being personally treated by their boss, right? So you can't let things go. You have to recruit, you have to train, you have to say, this is what stewardship is about. This is where we need to be selfless. But you have to allow for a whole lot more play of individuality. We keep talking about diversity. Well, where's the diversity of voices? I mean, including syntax, grammar, phrasing. And if you're younger, where's a voice that sounds like mine in this mix? If you're the brand policing and you're saying there's only one voice in an increasingly diverse world and one set of phrasing and one way of speaking to one's values, I'm afraid that's overly restrictive and is going to compromise your brand by causing too many people to go, don't see myself in it, don't see my soul in that.
Lori has a great comment. Love languages: verbal, acts of service, physical gifts.
Yeah,
I think that, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and if if you give us, let's say, a scholarship to an institution of higher learning, and you get different letters from different students, as I said before, I could care less. Somebody said, well, some of them aren't grammatically correct. I can tell that English is not the first language of some of those. But do I care that their English is a little fractured because they got a scholarship and they're doing well in school, they're posting good grades, and they're busting their behinds? Do I care if the grammar's a little off? I mean, come on, folks.
Yeah, there's a control element there.
Yeah, don't overly control this kind of things. Let people speak for themselves. Again, a lot of you will know that when I was at Georgetown, we sent students out to conduct forensic interviews with first lapsed alumni donors, right? They were nervous. They would stumble. They would spill water on their lap. They would do, because they were young, and they would do things that were maybe a seasoned professional wouldn't do. But the alumni loved them because they were real. They saw through the foibles and the youthfulness, and really appreciated the fact that somebody was trying to interact with them. So this control. The other thing is, look how we've gotten to see one another's humanity on Zoom. So we hear kids in the background, we hear people's noises in the house, and cats leap up on the screen. Didn't make it, in my estimation, it didn't make anybody seem less professional. It only made them seem more human and professional.
There you go.
They were professional.
And think of the transformational gifts, right, Jim, that people have been raising with donors in their kitchens and carrying babies and, all types of situations, right?
Yeah.
That would seem unprofessional.
Yeah.
Another time.
Such great comments in the chat room. Such great comments. I hope everybody, this is just what Louis and I hope. This is conversation with everyone contributing. So as we're talking, great stuff is coming in. Please, everybody, just watch that conversation. It's better than Louis and I can do by ourselves.
And add to it. And I just have to say, I'm seeing experts here like Susan, I think up in Canada, and Jay, now down in Florida. It's really a nationwide and maybe even international conversation. So
there's a great response, Louis. You asked about Giving Tuesday, and Steve says these are different statements. True, philanthropy is alive and well, but Giving Tuesday needs to get a facelift. What a wonderfully provocative comment. So, first of all, I agree that Giving Tuesday is a little too presumptive and is unmindful of the decline in giving households. So I think philanthropy, as it resides in the individual spirit, is fine, but trust toward institution is eroding and causing philanthropy to go off the grid. So I want to make that distinction in this conversation.
Absolutely. And we all saw the press releases, more money raised in Giving Tuesday than ever, which...
A lot of hype.
Exactly.
A lot of hype, a lot of buzz, but a lot of it seems false to people who are looking at the underpinning trends. Jay says, you mean Talking Tuesday? We're all posting on LinkedIn. Look at us, Mom. Look what we did. Look at all the money we raised. Are we wonderful? Meanwhile, just about everybody has lost constituency and is going to see a higher attrition rate from Giving Tuesday, and then from other approaches that are more fundamentally sound. But no, the thing I dislike about this profession is this falseness, is this pretending. Everything's hunky-dory when anybody with a half a brain knows it isn't. So why? What is with this cheerful falseness? What's with it?
I mean, and I think there's a way to be, cautiously optimistic, right? I mean, and just have trust in humankind and in the American philanthropic spirit. I mean, Giving
optimistic,
Day and disaster fundraising just intrinsically develops the wrong kind of habits, which is what I just don't get. Why are we relying more and more on these excitement-driven kind of one-offs promotions instead of promoting loyalty, donor loyalty or other types of behaviors?
We want to be positive about our mission. We want to be positive about our purpose. We want to be positive about our efforts. But this constant kind of false positivity, as trust is eroding, as constituency is losing steam, right? All those things that we know going on behind the scenes. And as people don't feel listened to, it's again that kind of raw, everything is great and everything is fine and everything is sunny, that causes some people to go, what on earth is the matter with those people? I mean, they're smoking something funny and they've lost touch with reality.
Yeah. Anyhow, more questions from folks. I'm running out of my conversation provokers today.
Yeah. So yeah, anybody, let's see here. Yeah, not a single
Wonderful.
nonprofit watchdog rates for donor loyalty. So maybe what we need is new criteria for determining what a high functioning nonprofit is.
You read my mind, Jim. Okay, so I want to share an idea in the intimacy here.
That came from Jay, yeah.
Of this room. What would we think of having the number of donors who have given to you consecutively for the 3 last years as a metric? You know, it seems superior to me to donor retention because it's kind of hard to calculate and lots of places stumble with that. Just say, you know, how many people have been giving to me for 3 years or more?
Yeah, I think somehow a sustainability measure. And so you're saying the same person. So some people will just say, well, our numbers of donors aren't off that much, but they're bringing in a group that's falling away quickly and they're losing donors who were more persistent. So we have to look at persistence of individuals, not just persistence of numbers of donors, right?
Gotta exactly, and major donors tend to have given for longer to organizations, which is also kind of the pipeline. When I started the profession, Jim, I kept hearing, "Oh, annual fund, that's where you build the pipeline." Nobody really ever explained what that meant to me. Over time, I've kind of discovered with what I've read from you and others that it's a lot about trust pipeline.
Right. Trust pipeline, and then content pipeline. So you're not going to build a pipeline just by begging, but by showing differences, by projecting where private funds can make a better difference, right? So all those things go into building pipeline is stewarding, showing return on investment, listening, aligning, and then saying, here's what we're committed to doing better, as opposed to this generic asking for broad purposes, which is causing people to go, but for what? What's this about, right? All those things build trust and build pipeline. But one of the thoughts I don't want to lose, maybe for this the auspices we're under, is us writing a letter to those nonprofit evaluative agencies saying we study donor retention and we're in conversation with top flight pros around the world. Here's what we think constitutes the hallmarks and the benchmarks for high functioning nonprofits. And we think you should include this criteria in your evaluation. I think that would be really a constructive step.
That would be amazing. And I think it would help resolve Elizabeth's question. How often advancement leadership doesn't share the same philosophy as you do, Jim? So part of it is driven by, they're looking at the evaluators, and the evaluators are saying it's all fine as long as they keep the same number of donors or they increase their dollars.
Right. But how can we talk about advancement leadership that is unmindful of trends beneath their feet that are going to undercut the potential of that organization in following years? So leadership is looking into the horizon. Leadership involves anticipation. Leadership, by definition, involves foresight. So we have people occupying advancement positions, but I wouldn't call those that lack foresight leaders.
Well, this is amazing, Jim. Let's start a petition. I'll get the ball rolling after the session today.
Yeah, and maybe people contributing what they think is the most important criteria for evaluating the health of an organization, and we quantify this. I think this is a great concrete conversation where all of us can make a real contribution to the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me go through.
I see enthusiasm for this in the chat room as well. Is let's do this. What makes for a healthy organization? What criteria should we be using? And how about continuity of staff as an indicator of health or ill health, right? So if your average tenure of a development staff is 17 months, if the average tenure of your advancement leader is less than 2 years, right? Let's look at that. And let's maybe even look at the tenure of a CEO, because if people keep turning over, it's an indication that reality is catching up with an organization that's been ignoring it for too long. I will submit to you that a huge part of turnover in advancement isn't the greener pasture. It isn't human nature to leave a job. It is the feeling that one's soul has been, philanthropic soul has been taken away in pursuit of unrealistic fundraising objectives. I would submit to you it's how we lose the best people in fundraising.
Well, and we part from the thesis that it takes 3 years to build trust, on average, and sometimes you'll get a significant gift in the first 5 minutes. But if we part from that premise, you would think you want to keep people at least that long, no? And maybe,
yeah. So I think we lose donors. I think somebody's making a point here, Susan. We're losing donors and staff for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we got leadership. In some cases, they can't see the commonality between the two. Oh, these things are related. It's a loss of authenticity. It's a loss of connection. It's a lack of responsiveness. So everybody here who's done fundraising knows how hard it is to pick up on something that could be done externally for a single donor or for a group of donors, to see opinions changing, to come back to the home base and not be heard, or go, well, just go raise the money and we don't have time for that, right? You see an opportunity to bring a donor closer, to put a better idea in front of him or her, to repair a relationship, and you can't get people internally to respect and respond to that. What happens to your spirit, to your morale?
Absolutely. Maybe, Jim, you are familiar with Amy Edmondson's work. I'm not, but Elizabeth here is sharing it as a good pointer to measure workplace health.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Wonderful. So, here we are. We're now talking about so many things other than dollars raised vis-a-vis dollars spent on fundraising. And we're now saying health. And people will remember I use a tool called a vital signs analysis to help institutions understand their philanthropic health, where we look at a lot of the factors that we're talking about. But now, as a group of kindred spirits here, we're talking about now taking those and saying, we need to make these industry standards I love this. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes I think of, if one were an investment analyst and you could invest in nonprofits, and okay, so a nonprofit is selling, or is obtaining revenue from something that takes 3-4 years to emerge, to develop. What metrics would you look at for that, right? Are they losing all their staff and institutional knowledge in, 2 times in the middle of that process?
That's right. That's right. And so imagine if we could look at fundraiser health, and, people will say, well, you got laggards, you got complainers. Yeah, but in every subset of humanity, that's true, right? In every organization, that's true. But listen to the best, don't dismiss everybody. Don't lump everybody into one group. And so listening to your own staff and looking for commonalities across the board is incredibly important. In other words, if everybody's feeling the same thing. I did a private consultation with a group in annual giving, and across the board, they were frustrated by what they were hearing and witnessing on a regular basis that they couldn't get management to acknowledge, much less respond to. Mm-hmm. Acknowledge, right? So why are we calling young alumni when the return is so low, when the hang-up rate is so high? And why can't we do what other organizations are doing, is just reach out calls for young alums first, just checking in, how are you? How are things since graduation, right? Why aren't we using these annual giving vehicles for polling, outreach, checking in, conversation starting, right? Interesting how we want to convert everything to a mode of harvesting and virtually nothing to planting, growing, cultivating, nurturing. harvest, 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 as if the earth suddenly produces crops on its own, irrespective of what we do. The same is true of philanthropy.
Yeah, and the world has changed too. Perhaps the terrain
Yes,
has changed over time too.
yes.
Yes.
So, yeah, the other thing we see in the chat box is this giving credit to a single person for a gift given to an institution. And we know that those greatest gifts are long relationships, decade or more, long conversations of a year or more. They're not based on the guile or giftedness of a gift officer, but on the good work done by many people within the organization. Then suddenly one person gets credit because they were just in the right place at the right time, or said the right things, or figured out what was in that person's mind. Now, I was often that person, and I'd certainly want to be given credit for the good work I did, but never did I think I was the self-contained sole reason for anybody's reason for giving ever. So are we over celebrating certain things and maybe failing in internal stewardship, that when a gift is received, not only to thank all parties at advancement, but all people in the organization who helped build the value proposition that we just leveraged? Who really was responsible for creating the value of the thing that the donor just funded? When does that recognition get afforded?
Absolutely. Absolutely credit that. I have a background as an economist, and Jim, and that just always, I hear incentives, right, all the time, and our incentives are just misaligned, it seems, right now.
Yeah, always about incentives, and again, human motivation. What gets us up in the morning? What causes us to want to make a difference in our lives, to give, to work an extra hour, to right? And to understand that within our operations, to understand that within our donor community, I think we're still, Louis, at a primitive stage in what I hope is a greater evolution to be witnessed in years and decades ahead. We're still in a largely exploitive way of thinking, not in a regenerative, mutually satisfying way of thinking.
May you be heard. Jim, what did you tell the annual fund team you were advising as a strategy to manage up?
To quantify what they've heard, so not just to say what, but to start, keeping quantification of hang-ups, of no's, of statements referred to over and over again, to quantify and start doing regular reports on market analysis for annual giving. And I would submit it would be the formalization of that that's going to be hard to ignore, even if you're a boss that doesn't want to hear it. These reports get filed, you realize somebody's creating a record in a very professional way, and that you somehow have to respond to that record, because if push comes to shove and somebody says what went wrong, at least one group of people is showing accountability, recording what's working, what isn't, and then make suggestions. Always, anytime you're filing reports to your bosses, always make suggestions of, rather than do this, shouldn't we be doing that? So just don't say where you're encountering frustrations. Say, this is the better path forward from everything we can tell. Always try to be a broker of solutions or better ways. Always.
That's wonderful advice, Jim. I'm going to hide the comments today. This has been a fantastic conversation. We may even have come up with a small project for a petition and a collaborative effort to redefine what our metrics should be.
The other thing, if I could say, if we have just a minute, is that staff that we were just talking about was so pleased just by my listening, right? And my validating and my telling them they're not alone, that these things happen elsewhere, that the situations they're encountering unfortunately happen elsewhere. But, to continue to do their good work, because good work can always be repurposed. If one place doesn't get it, you'll find out somewhere down the road the wisdom you gained here can be applied there. The frustration you acquired here will make you a better boss someday, right? So I always try to remind people that good work is never for naught. you will see somewhere down the road the efforts that weren't recognized here that you felt were for naught weren't. They will bear fruit somewhere else in your career. So keep trying, don't give up, and don't use a bad boss as a reason for not putting forward your best effort. And anytime you're with a donor, remember it's about them. And that's when you want to be what you feel is missing in your life. Be for them, there for them. Listen, validate them, make them feel heard because you know what it feels like not to be heard. So don't get so wounded you don't deliver to the consumer what you feel is missing in your own life.
Thank you, Jim. And if I may add, it's do good work and then share the work, right? And tell people about it. Tell Jim,
Which
you
you
go
do
on
so well. Which you do so well. This guy, Lewis, is tossing off so many good things in such a casual way on LinkedIn. I'm afraid people are missing it. Watch what he's putting out there. It's so content rich. Dig into it. He does it in a kind of a casual, offhanded way, but it's a huge resource. It's a fount of wonderful, insightful, from strategical to tactical information. Really proud of you, Lewis.
I learned, thank you, Jim, and I learned from the community here really every day. So if you are working on something in your shop, in your annual giving shop, in your major gift shop that's worthy of sharing, please do share it and reach out to us, reach out to Jim, connect with him, and put it out there for the world to learn from. So those are my last words for today. Jim, do you want to say anything else?
No, thank you
No,
to all.
we're
Thank
done.
you for the wonderful chat. Let's keep it up. Let's think about the next time we're together about the issues we want to address. Maybe we'll create an agenda about donor retention over time. But I can't tell you how proud I am of you to know that you're out there, that you're doing your best, notwithstanding difficult circumstances. You matter. You make me so proud, and you give so much meaning to my life to know you're there and that you join us for these conversations. Thank you.
Thanks for keeping us learning. Bye, everybody.